Gather round, folks, and let me tell you some crime stories that'll have you howling with laughter and shaking your heads in disbelief. This ain't your typical tale of daring heists and cunning masterminds. Nope. This is a story about the biggest bozos the criminal world has ever seen. Trust me, these knuckleheads make the Keystone Cops look like criminal masterminds. First up, we've got young Gunga Gunga, a 17-year-old kid from Omaha, Nebraska. On a bright and sunny March day, this little scamp decided to stick a gun in some poor woman's face as she was taking her kids to school, demanding that she give him her car. Now, that's a bold move, but here's where the real comedy begins. After the terrified mom hands over her car keys, Gunga realizes he can't drive a stick shift. So he's fumbling around trying to figure out the clutch and gears while the car is barely moving an inch. Eventually he gives up and bolts on foot, only to be caught by the cops a short while later. Talk about a rookie mistake. Next up, we've got Derek Mosley, a guy who clearly skipped the planning part of Criminal 101. This genius decides to rob a gun store, armed with nothing but a baseball bat. I mean, come on, what did he think was going to happen? Sure enough, the store manager pulls out a gun and keeps him at gunpoint until the cops show up. Smooth move, Derek. These men were behind likely the worst and least thought out disguises in the history of crime. When committing their misdeed, they didn't use the masks, hoods, or balaclavas typical of most criminals, but instead chose to draw on their faces with permanent marker. While it may have made them hard to recognize during the crime, permanent marker is, as the name suggests, notoriously hard to remove, which left the men extremely easy to identify when the police were looking for the culprits. The dumb stunt earned the duo the nickname Dumb and Dumber. Now, let's talk about Mark Smith, a guy who clearly has no concept of timing. In 2007, this dude breaks into a house, but instead of grabbing the loot and running, he decides to take a nap in the homeowner's bed. I mean, talk about a rookie move. Unsurprisingly, he gets woken up by the cops and slapped with an 18-month sentence. Guess he didn't get his beauty sleep after all. In August of 1995, a man in Berlin decided to rob a bank with a handgun. Now, this acted out like a pretty standard bank robbery until the tellers asked him, "Do you need a bag?" To which Schmidt responded, "You're damn right it's a real gun." This made it obvious to the tellers that the robber was deaf. With this new realization, they sounded the alarm, which notified the police, while Schmidt was none the wiser. In a funny twist, Schmidt later sued the bank for apparently abusing his disability. Now, let's talk about James Blankenship, a guy who clearly missed the memo on how burglary works. This genius tried to break into his own mother's house in broad daylight, no less. When the cops showed up, he was genuinely shocked because he thought you couldn't be arrested for burglary during the day. Yep, you heard that right. He thought daylight was a get-out-of-jail-free card. Next up, we've got Ruben Zarate, an 18-year-old kid from Chicago who tried to rob a muffler shop. But here's the kicker. When the store didn't have the cash on hand, he left his cell phone number so they could call him back when the manager arrived to open the safe. Genius, right? Of course, the store called the cops instead, and when Zarate showed up, he got into a shootout before being arrested. In 2010, Bailey and an unnamed juvenile accomplice decided to rob a bank in Fairfield, Connecticut. But in an attempt to speed up the process of the crime, Bailey called the bank in advance to let them know that they were coming to rob it. His obvious intent was to give the bank plenty of time to get the money ready so he could just pick it up and leave quickly. Of course, the bank decided to call the authorities and notify them of the robber's arrival, and the two men were arrested by police without incident. But the cherry on top, the creme de la creme of criminal stupidity, has got to be Dennis Hawkins, a 48-year-old man who tried to rob a bank in Pittsburgh. Hawkins clearly didn't get the memo about needing a good disguise that can quickly blend into the crowd after the crime, as he chose a woman's blonde wig, fake breasts, and bright clown pants. Even worse still, in his failed attempt to pretend to be a woman, he didn't even take the time to shave his facial hair. As if the man wasn't noticeable enough, he drew even more attention to himself when he tried to steal a car from a nearby gas station, where the attendant then called the police, who apprehended Hawkins soon after. Well, folks, there you have it. A roundup of the dumbest criminals the world has ever seen. Let these tales of criminal ineptitude be a lesson to us all. If you're gonna break the law, at least have the sense to plan it out properly. Otherwise, you just might end up as a shining example of how not to be a criminal mastermind.